Hello and welcome. Today we want to talk about progressive delivery. My name is Orit Golowinski and I'm a senior product manager at GitLab. Progressive delivery can also be thought about as experimentation with features in production while minimizing the risk. So what we'll talk about today is continuous delivery, progressive delivery, review apps, BlueGreen deployments, Canary releases, feature flags with Canary, and A/B testing. A little bit about myself. My Twitter handle is GoOrit. I mentioned my name is Orit Golowinski. So I am now the product manager of the progressive delivery group at GitLab, which is under the release stage. Formerly, I was director of R&D infrastructure, which also included managing DevOps teams, is where I really found my passion for CI/CD. I also helped in the past transition R&D teams from waterfall to agile. And I really enjoy helping creating the features that can actually make this happen. Previous roles that I had included director of QA, director of product management in numerous companies, and I'm also the mother of 3 girls. So let's start by a recap. Let's talk about continuous delivery. So continuous delivery is a software development discipline where you build software in such a way that software can be released to production at any time. And you achieve this by continuously integrating the software done by the development team, building executables and running automated tests on those executables to detect problems. Furthermore, you push the executables into increasingly production-like environments to ensure the software will work in production as it should. So if we look at the CI/CD pipeline, we have this continuous integration pipeline, which includes the build and test phase. When we move into the CD pipeline, we have the review phase, which is in the production-like environment, staging, and finally deploying to production. So progressive delivery, now that we understood what continuous delivery is, it's continuous delivery with fine-grained control over the blast radius. And progressive delivery is a term coined by James Governor from Redmonk, and he coined this term last year in QCon London. And what this means is that it ensures the strength and flexibility of the system through numerous creative experimentations, which is why we're going to talk about experimentations throughout this talk. And the bottom line is that we all want to ship faster and in smaller increments. And we're going to explore some of the strategies for feature releasing and even testing in production with this experimentation. So the first feature that I'd like to talk about is review apps. And review apps provide an automatic live preview of changes made in a feature branch by spinning up a dynamic environment for your merge request. So if we look at this slide, you can see we have a master branch and then we have a topic branch, which can be, each developer can create their own branch, even per merge request. And then every single merge that is done on this topic branch spins up in a production-like dynamic environment and lets you visually see what your changes look like in such an environment. The powerful thing is that they allow designers and product managers to see your changes without needing to check out your branch and run your changes in a sandbox environment. Basically, all they need to do is hit on a URL and they get to see a production-like environment. And this is really powerful because even non-technical members of the team can take a look and give you reviews and comments about what it looks like. So this is a famous meme. I don't always test my code, but when I do it in production. So I had mentioned that in the past I managed QA teams, and the notion of testing in production would have given me nightmares in the past. The idea that somehow someone would impair or taint the database or the data in production would have literally kept me up at night. However, there really is no better way to check a release post-deployment than on production, because no other environment is going to be exactly the same as production. So even if you did really extensive testing in your testing, staging, development environments, there's always some kind of nasty surprise that didn't surface. and will show up in the production environment. So today, testing in production is a common practice, unlike in the past. And as long as it's controlled and monitored, the teams, the developers and testers alike, learn to trust their deployment and safety nets found in the development pipeline, and in order to trust actually testing in production. So the first method that I want to discuss is rather simple. It's called BlueGreen Deployment. And the idea is that you deploy to two environments while blue is exposed to production, to the users, and development continues on the green environment. And once you're ready to deploy your new code, you swap the two environments. So if we look at the slide, you can see that before we have the blue environment, they're all on V1 of the development, and development continues on V2. And when the team decides that it's time to deploy to production, they simply swap. So every one of the users is going to see the green new deployment. The biggest downside for this approach is that if something goes wrong, the entire development is rolled back. So it's not just the faulty feature, but everything related to the latest deployment. A similar concept, but a little bit more sophisticated, is Canary releases. So in a Canary release, you start with all your machines or Dockers or pods or whatever you're using at 100% of the current deployment, which is the blue deployment, similar to our previous example. And now when you're ready to try out your new deployment, you only set it to a subset of your users. So not 100% of the users are going to get this new deployment, only some of them. So let's say you have 100 machines where your deployment is living, and now you only want to set the traffic to 2%, sending traffic to 2% of the population to only 2 machines. So that's what you do. So if you look at the slide, we have the before, very similar to the previous slide, where we had everyone on version 1 on the blue. And now during the rollout of Canary, you can see that we have a portion of the deployment going into the green, the new deployment, while the rest, the majority of the deployment is still on blue, on V1. And when you're ready to roll out everything, you get 100%, and the entire audience gets the green, the new deployment. Of course, you're going to need some kind of logic somewhere to figure out how to route those users, and you need to decide whether the user routing is going to be sticky, meaning that the user is going to experience the same consistent behavior every time they log into your system, which you probably will. And now what you want to do on this 2% deployment, you want to pay very close attention to see how those servers are doing, how they're behaving, if there are any errors or performance degradations, which gives you really immediate feedback on your new behavior, which is great. And if everything works well, you can slowly increase the percentage of the users that get the new deployment. And if something goes wrong, you can just drain the traffic back to the blue deployment, and everyone gets back to the previous version. And since it's a very small subset of the users, it's really contained. So the failure is really, really contained. The downside here is very similar to the downside in blue-green. If something goes wrong, you need to roll back the entire development and not only the faulty feature. And this is very important because we're going to talk about feature flags, which is a little bit different. But before that, I wanted to show you what Canary releases look like in GitLab. So you can see here, we have a bunch of pods that are rolling out, and you can see the new deployments are in the dark green boxes, where the old deployments are in the hollow pod boxes, and you can see and monitor to see how your rollout is doing. And you always have the option to abort, to stop rolling out, or even roll back. So next up is feature flags. And feature flags can be used as part of a software development to enable a feature to be tested even before it's completed and ready for release. A feature flag is used to hide, enable, or disable a feature during runtime. The unfinished features are hidden or toggled so they don't appear in the user interface. And this allows many, many small incremental versions of software to be delivered without the cost of constant branching and merging. When you think about it, feature flags work as an if or else inside your code. Some users will match the criteria, some will not match the criteria. Those who meet the criteria will have their feature enabled, while the others will not be able to see this in the user interface. It's very similar to the Canary in that sense, where you can control the audience that gets the feature flag, and that you get immediate feedback for your new functionality, and you can decide whether or not you want to expose more users to this new functionality, or if something goes wrong, you just disable it. The really nice benefit is that the feature flags is rule-based, and rules can change dynamically and on the fly at any time. So you don't need to redeploy your entire deployment if you want to change something. It's a logical operation. So really, you don't need to do anything in the infrastructure level, and you just turn as simple as turning on or off a switch. Feature flags are basically Canary for features, allowing you to roll out features gradually, slowly exposing features, and if something goes wrong, you can confine the feature to a smaller audience or even to a different environment. The feature still lives in production, but it's not available, and that's really powerful because you can enable it for specific groups like your QA team to test in production, and the rest of the user will not be able to see it. So similar to our Canary slide, you can see we have blue and green, but now we can roll out the new deployment and have different flags, one for feature A, feature B, and so on and so forth, where you can control each one individually. This is what feature flags looks like in GitLab. You can see we have the status, the toggle, if it's on or off, the name, which environment it's enabled to, and even the strategy. You can see here it's enabled on testing for 50% and in production for 10%. So you can really play around with it. So feature flags versus Canary, there's different differences between them. The biggest ones are the placement. Feature flags are on the application level. So also we talked about the fact that rules can be logical and based on your application, whereas Canary is in the infrastructure layer. It really routes the traffic to different URLs or to different environments. The people who orchestrate feature flags can basically be anyone on the team. You don't need, it's not very, very complicated, and you need to know what you're doing in terms of the infrastructure. Since it's as simple as turning on and off a switch, it many times goes to developers, product managers, QA, customer supports, and so on and so forth. Whereas Canary usually is managed by DevOps or SREs. We mentioned the fact that rule-based can be based on an application rule, so you can enable specific flags for a domain, a tier. Let's say you want to enable something only for premium users, or for some users that meet specific criteria in your application. For example, you have categorized someone who has over 100 songs in their playlist. That could be a specific category for a user that you want to enable specific feature functionality just for them. And anyone that doesn't have that amount of songs in their playlist, they won't be able to see the feature. The rollback, this is really important, is that it's granular. It's a specific feature that can be turned on or off in a feature flag, whereas in Canary, it's the entire deployment. So combining feature flags with Canary is really powerful because you get the best of both worlds. You can deploy Canary releases with all of the feature flags turned off and monitor the Canary to see that everything is performing correctly. And once you're confident that the Canary is stable, you can slowly turn on and monitor each feature flag individually to see if you can increase their exposure. And turning off a feature flag, as we mentioned, doesn't really require rolling back the entire deployment. So even if it needs to be turned off, the rest of the features can still be rolled out and live in production. A/B testing is kind of an add-on onto feature flags. It can be thought about as an extension of feature flags. What it does is allow testing of variables on different groups of data and monitoring which is the preferred method. So let's take a simple example. We have a website that wants to increase sales and wants to check which workflow will result with users adding more items into their carts. So developers can experiment with different user flows, each one sending the user to a different route on the website's UI. And they monitor the website for some time and see which flow resulted in the most revenue or the most items in a cart. And at the end of the experiment, that's going to be the chosen flow for all the users, not only the targeted ones. This is a really efficient way to test the change on usability, and based on test results, which can even be a business goal, as we mentioned, or better performance, or more customer engagement, and so on, you can make a decision what's going to be the final flow in your product. So we talked about a few methods of progressive delivery, and I do want to mention some pros and cons before we conclude the session. So you can already see that there's much more pros than there are cons, but let's go through them. So pros is the ability to control feature distribution. You can segment your users and really share with a very small audience the new functionality. And then in case of a failure, in this case, only a small group of users are exposed to the failure. And so there's not a lot of harm. You have the ability to test in production before rolling out to users. So we mentioned this, just enabling it for a QA team, for example. Fast feedback and metrics for new features. This is really the key of everything that we want to do in Agile. Fast feedback and quick action on it. More roles in the team can manage new features in production. So we mentioned anyone on the team can turn on feature flags, for example. And fast rollback in case needed. So since we have fast feedback, we can roll back really, really easily. So either turn off the flag or roll back to the previous environment. So some cons, there are some. One of them is the need to monitor, for example, latency, traffic errors, and saturation. But on the other hand, monitoring systems can also create notifications or triggers that can even trigger a rollback or stop the rollout in case of some kind of problem. So you can also think of this as a pro. It can introduce technical debt. So for example, feature flags add some complexity and additional code to your code base, but you can always create a process to clear stale feature flags and experiments to make sure that it's not long living. And it's more complex to understand customer scenarios. So imagine a customer is calling customer support and they're complaining of a problem. Customer support really needs to understand what that specific customer is seeing, because not all the customers see the exact same interface. So a way to mitigate for that is adding config files or breadcrumbs so that it's really easy for a customer support representative to know exactly what the user is seeing. So in conclusion, when you want to test in production, it's important to monitor the system and have an easy way to roll back. The different factors in progressive delivery are environments and users. When controlling environments, developers can develop features progressively into environments to limit exposure when the new code is deployed. And when done for users, users are segmented in some way. It can be arbitrary, like percentage, which we talked about, but it can be also like a specific identifier like domain or tier, as we mentioned, so premium users, or even new users, anyone who entered my system and hasn't been there for over 30 days or something like that. The developer progressively delivers the changes exposed to that set of users. And at the end of the day, it's all about the feedback loop and making a conscious decision whether you can continue rollout or if you need to roll back. When we think about this change in the state of mind, even the ownership of features and production changes. So originally features were owned by the engineering team. And now once the feature hits production, ownership moves to release managers, product managers, even customer support teams. They're closer to the customers and closer to the feedback. And this frees up more time for developers to work on newer development. So I want to thank you for your time, for listening to me today. And I invite you to meet me in the network chat lounge for Q&A. So thank you.